If you're in this field of either marketing or customer experience, I would encourage you to very, very quickly figure out how to talk about the value of what you're doing. Because many times marketing, while they have a lot of budget, sometimes is, you know what, if you're not performing, that's the first thing to go.
Hello and welcome to a whole new episode of Engati CX. I'm your host Drishti, and today we have a customer experience expert joining with us on the show. But before I introduce you to the expert, allow me to introduce you to the magic of Engati. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code digital CX platform, available across 14 channels with 45,000 solutions created across 186 countries in every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by INC.com, Tech World, CIO, and many others. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 400,000 visitors annually. And now for our guest, Diane Magers is the founder and chief experience officer at Experience Catalysts. She's an accomplished senior customer experience, sales, and marketing executive, and is an exceptional and innovative leader. She has partnered and mentored, consulted, and resolved many complex businesses for Fortune 100 companies, startups, and mid-sized organizations. Diane also speaks at many events to educate organizations while they are going through their journey towards enhancing their customer experience practices. So welcome to the show, Diane. We are really happy to have you.
Hey, I am so pleased to be here. Thank you. I think you guys do a wonderful job, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much. But before we dive into the interview, don't forget to subscribe to Engati and tap the bell icon to get access to exclusive content from thought leaders around the world. So the first question that we have for you is, how can companies deliver consistent brand value messaging to drive results?
I think one of the misnomers is that customer experience is all just about listening to customers and coming up with a score, right? And when I talk to practitioners and say, you know, that's kind of the basics, you're just getting started. I think the ability for us to really drive that understanding into action, the right action for customers, and make sure that it really represents and is part of our brand strategy. So what I mean by that is, if the brand is trying to create a particular experience or be a certain personality or expend into a certain marketplace or part of the market, that customer experience should be leading from there. The other part of that is not only are you leading, but also you are attaching the fact that your interactions with your customers is really what drives the value for your organization. So everything you do impacts how customers feel, how they interact with the brand, and that's how they change their behavior. And so we try to really help practitioners start to connect the fact that you're changing behavior of customers, and that's what's really driving the business result. So you're responsible to make sure those experiences are good, that they're engaging customers, that you're helping to acquire and retain and engage them through their life cycle. So I think your question is spot on in that a lot of practitioners don't really connect the fact of what their responsibility is when it comes to engaging customers and making sure that brand comes to life.
That's true. So do you have any tips on how people can go about delivering that message and driving results from that as well?
I love to talk to organizations about identifying those stories that you can tell. So we all really resonate with human stories. Showing somebody a dashboard or showing them a business case, while they're important, are really the stories we want to tell are things about what we go through in our own lives and how we're also impacting customers' lives as we go about where we're doing. So the messaging gets a little, I think, distorted when we think about this is all about surveys. This is all about the things we've talked about, when really it's about being very intimate with our customers and the data and their needs and preferences, and then how we turn around and tell a story about positive and negative impacts we might be having on the customer and the resulting behavior and the impact of the business value as a result of that. So I'm a huge fan of bringing that human experience back in to the storytelling matching that with numbers so that the numbers give us credibility, but the story is really what we're after.
Right. That actually makes sense. Like, if I'm a consumer, it would be better for me to tell a story on how somebody was successful rather than just showing the analytics and dashboards. Yeah.
Yeah, the best way to do that, if you're talking to an executive or you're talking to a business leader, is to have them describe an experience to you, experience they've had, a good one or a bad one. And what you begin to realize is that as they tell that story, they're telling you what happened, they're telling you how they felt about it, they're telling you how they changed their behavior related to that particular experience. And if you start to then say, equate that to the impact it had on the brand, that you left, which is customer lifetime value, you told other people, which reduces their likelihood to acquire, which impacts their revenue, and negative social media, we all know what happens to that. So once they kind of have that light bulb moment, it's easier to come across and say, the reason we're redesigning this experience or trying to move this brand into this particular market is because we're after those stories. We're after those human elements of every interaction somebody has, because we all know that we're all hypersensitive to it now. You can have a beautiful experience with an organization and one thing can kind of go sideways. If you don't have that brand trust and have that relationship already built with them where they're willing to forgive you, it's going to be more difficult. They'll just leave. So I equate that to Starbucks. Starbucks is all over the world. And so I equate it to, I go to Starbucks enough where I get all these great experiences. So if one time they mess up my drink, I'm fine with it because I've built that relationship with them and this kind of bank account, if you will, of great experiences. So I'm not as likely to be as sensitive to it. Where if I went to a coffee shop several times and I had iffy experiences and they always got my order wrong and be like, I'm moving on. So we have to understand the granularity of every single interaction, but also how we care for that brand experience and the brand relationship.
That makes sense. Yeah. So, as a creative strategist, what would you think would be a good approach for SMEs to follow and to ensure success when they are marketing any product or services?
So marketing in particular. So when we talk to marketing, I think what I like to say have been some of the secrets of what's worked well for organizations that I see across the board is getting a deeper knowledge of the customer. And I don't mean trying to really understand where they are, but the ability for us to connect with them, gather the right information from them, psychographics, with all this stuff about customer data platforms is great. But we're missing still, with all the digital that's going on, we're really missing that human side. Yeah. How are we truly engaging with them in even our messaging, right? So messaging has become a great channel, but what I see marketers doing is simply sending out that message in a very tactical, concise way. It's not a conversation. And so we see this conversation strategy really starting to play out in messaging with marketing. So that's an example. Of using information and using that to make that connection. The second piece I see is a lot of times marketers are chasing the flavor of the day. They don't have a true plan for where they're headed and what they really want customers to do. They're also focused just on the acquisition plan, but they're not really as focused on the engagement plan. And the ability for a customer to do business with you once is great, but if you don't start caring for that entire journey, you're going to be filling the pipeline up front. So why does that happen? Because I think that marketing, we're seeing it expand more now across the customer journey. But if there's a purposeful intent to say, we're going to market in all of these different areas, then and work with a customer experience professional to do that, they'll understand where they're going to have opportunity to avoid churn or to engage customer with a different market. And so we see this ability now for marketing to be much more comprehensive than it was before. It was always kind of the tip of the spear, and here's the customer research, and we bring them in the front door, but then what happens after? So it's very enlightening for marketing to work with customer success teams or even a customer support team to understand where that experience is going wrong and how they can go upstream a little bit and understand how they're going to market and engage to a customer at those key moments of truth. So that to me has been always one of the critical components of working throughout that journey and partnering with the other organizations rather than sitting in your bubble and trying to get, people in the front door. It just doesn't work anymore.
That's true. So, what is responsible for the development and execution of direct sales or management or administration? Like you just mentioned that we need to focus on the customer touch points, right? So how do we effectively capture these customer touch points throughout the journey?
I'd like to think that as customer experience professionals, we help the organization create a blueprint for where those interactions are occurring, what we're trying to build, right? So a lot of times organizations, they're getting better at it, but they don't really have a plan for holistically how we all working together to the same end. Every silo is doing their own thing. They all have their own goals, but there's not that all of agreement. If you were building a house and you didn't have a blueprint, it would be a mess, right? Well, it's the same thing. So knowing and centering around the experience allows you to say, it's not about each of our business units, it's about the customer. And so the blueprint is around how we're going to serve them, and it gets everybody on board. And so this ability to work differently, changing your ways of working, has been one of the things that we've seen, especially with COVID. The ways of working, the agility, the innovation, the collaboration has had to occur because organizations have had to move very quickly. And what we see is they then realize, oh, all along we've been working very slow. We haven't been working in a collaborative way. We haven't looked at, digital has been a great channel, but what they're realizing now is like we turned on all this digital, but we've lost connection with our customers. And so the ability to have a blueprint to say, you know what, we don't have input anymore. We're not sure how this digital experience is working. We have a lot of data on the analytics for our apps and our websites, but we don't really understand the why behind it. And so the blueprint becomes the understanding of the why as it relates to experience and how that's driving behavior. So I think that's how we can pull them together. It's a bit of creating a plan, a more holistic plan for the organization that really doesn't exist. It exists in the silos, but nobody's really stitching them together. And so the ability for customer who doesn't really care how we're organized, the ability to look at the customer and plan for that is part of how organizations who do this well are purposeful and intentional about that shift to understanding more holistically where the customers are and what's happening and the infrastructure that supports them and the processes and the workflows behind it that make that happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like currently, all different departments of an organization have a different view of the customer. Recently, I just read a blog by Zappos head of customer research. So he gave this example of the fable that there are 6 blind men and 1 elephant, and what the blind men are doing is just touching different parts of the elephant, and they all have a different view. Like one thinks the trunk is a snake, one thinks it's a giant wall, one is touching the tusk. So every department currently having different views of a single customer and or the customer persona which is there. So yeah. I guess that stitching is really, really important.
That is, but and I say that like it's easy to do. It's not easy to do because it requires if you think about what happens typically when you do, so a lot of companies do journey mapping to try to figure out, what's happening. Well, what happens after the journey mapping session is they're kind of left with, here's a laundry list of things to go do. And those organizations, the silos, take that information and go do something by themselves. So what we're seeing is organizations that changing the way they work is having cross-collaborative teams who are permanently on that project for whatever length of time, so that as you begin to develop that solution, you're looking from, the understanding of the brand all the way down to support and usage and information about where they are. So that's what I mean about we've really seen the experience of an organization, the way that they organize themselves and how they work together and collaborate, that's changing. And it's interesting to see that organizations who now are in the throes of what do we look like in the future, are using design thinking on their organization. Like they're understanding, current state, they're looking at, how do we really reorganize and change our workflows, our processes, our, how we work together on projects. They're really shifting a lot of that. So this has been not just COVID, but the customer experience and expectations of employees and customers has been a catalyst for changing the way organizations work. It's been interesting to watch that all along. I say this to other experienced leaders. I said all along we've been standing at the top of this mountain shouting that this is the way things need to get done. And it sometimes takes a little bit of a crisis for brands to go, yeah, we probably should be listening to our customers because their needs changed, right? Overnight almost. And so the ability for them to go, yeah, we don't really know now what's different and what they're expecting and how this is going to change our business model. So they've really had to get more introspective about what's happening. So that's been an interesting thing to watch about how organizations are either adjusting to it or they have their head in the sand or they're kind of saying, hey, digital's a new way to go, but they're totally missing the fact that they don't have this conversation and intimate knowledge of their customers as much as they used to. Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the catalyst. What are there any other catalysts that businesses have to transform the way they rule or enhance customer experience?
Yes, I would say, well, in addition to changing expectations, I think that many organizations, as I would say, they get more mature, even startups sometimes, are focused a lot on kind of their key, I would say, certain profile of customers. They're the ones who, typically have the most money, who are, a certain age, they're looking for what is that typical customer. And I think what we're really missing is the fact that we have, as this happens all the time, this newer generation of people who are really going to be buying differently, who are going to have different expectations, who expect different channels, who are willing to switch brands at the drop of a hat. It's a different way of consumption. It's a different way of working. I mean, I have an 18-year-old daughter, and the way that we approach brands and our expectations of brands and who we gravitate toward is completely different. And I think most brands are woefully underprepared or considering how they need to shift to that next generational change. I don't see it in plans. I don't hear about, what are we doing to think about the, 15-year-olds right now and where they're going to be in 5 years. And how, as they start to accumulate income and wealth, what do we need to be doing as a brand to do that? So this future and this innovation is typically around internal innovation and not really around what are we building toward and how are we shifting and leading the marketplace. So I think innovation has been misaligned to where it needs to be pointed to. And I think that psychographic and demographic is part of it. That just really tends to be missing from many plans. I see, what does it look like people have a hard time with, what does it look like in 10 years? People who right now you're targeting are going to be exiting the buying cycle. The employees you have today who have this great tribal knowledge are going to be leaving. You've got a shifting landscape of people coming in and they don't stay put. They don't stay put in an organization. So how are you going to codify that knowledge that's building, keep the culture of your organization? How are you creating and beginning to shift there? And I just don't see organizations that have somebody dedicated to that thinking and dedicated to how they're going to design their organizations moving forward. So that keeps me up at night. So I encourage organizations when I go in, I'm like, you got to be thinking about this stuff down the road, because we all know, think about 5 years ago. It's not that long ago. It's a blink of an eye. And so if you're not planning for that and you don't have somebody who's caring for that, and that group of customers especially, it's going to be a rude awakening pretty quickly. Yeah.
So are there any other sound bites that you would like to leave with our audience?
I think we've talked about a few, but we had the conversation about this interview. One of the things that I wanted to make sure that I shared with folks is the things that I wish I would have done earlier in my career. So I'm going to share those in kind of just three buckets. One, I think anybody should take the opportunity to become more of a generalist. And what I mean by that is you may have a passion for something and be really focused on user experience or marketing. But organizations in the future are going to need people who have a wealth of knowledge across all of the business concepts and business units and a general and sometimes deep understanding of how those pieces fit together. If you think about executives and organizations, they get moved around to different parts of the organization. There's a reason for that. So develop your skill sets and develop your knowledge of different areas. Go work in operations for a day, or go sit in the design with a design team for a day. Learn, because your ability to talk, especially somebody who wants to really help stitch things together and create that blueprint, needs to have knowledge across those areas. Two, I would say build your network. Build your network of people who are experts in your field that you're interested in. Don't be afraid to link in with a CEO or somebody that you admire in a field. They're more than willing to take time and help mentor you. In most cases, they really like to do it. So go find those people who can introduce you to the people you want to. Keep your network really live, both internally and externally in the organization. Because I think for our profession, we have to go to each of those business units and understand who they are and what they need in order for us to bring them on board. Right? So that's part of that network externally, but also figure out internally where you need to be understanding and delivering and providing there. The last thing I'll say is, if you're in this field of either marketing or customer experience, I would encourage you to very, very quickly figure out how to talk about the value of what you're doing. Because many times marketing, while they have a lot of budget, sometimes is, if you're not performing, that's the first thing to go. Customer experience, same way. Everybody says it's critical, we got to be there. But when it comes to actually investing in it, people don't understand the ROI. I was kind of forced to do it early because I worked in a supply chain company. So you had to tell a business case story pretty quickly. But what I see is organizations who are making changes around the experience and talking about net promoter score and effort score, which are fine. They're good barometers, but they're not talking about the ROI. They're not talking about, if we invest in this experience, this is the behavior we're getting and this is the business result we're going to get. They're not talking about that particular piece. This value creation needs to be part of their verbiage and their conversations with people, because that's really what we do. We change behavior of customers, and that's what drives the business results. So that's the three things that I wanted to drop and plant seeds in everybody's head. If I were talking to my younger self, the things that I would change as part of the trajectory of my career.
That's really helpful, Dan. I think that's lovely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And
Sure.
What I'll do, and I will request somebody who is watching this interview as well to implement these things, because it sounds really practical, and coming from somebody who's experienced, I would totally take that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not magic. It's not this crazy thing. It's not this soft and fuzzy thing. Customer experience is really no different than what anybody else in the organization is doing. All we're doing is being more holistic. We're bringing that outside-in approach, and we're orchestrating across the business units. But we have the same goals. We're trying to change customer behavior and engage them and help them be a part of the brand, back to what we talked about at the beginning. So put some structure around it. It is a very engaging and intimate part of an organization that really helps you put what I call the mortar between the bricks, right? You talked about the elephant. I talk about building a brick. While you're building your brand, you got to have somebody who can stitch all the pieces together. And that's really what we do for a profession. So there's another metaphor for you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Diane. Your insights and the stories that you have shared, I guess, are very valuable, and the audience is really going to enjoy this interview.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Stay safe.
Yeah. We'll be back with a new episode with a brand new expert soon, so stay tuned and we'll see you around for the next one.